Hi everybody and welcome back to Kevin's Upfront Opinion. So today what I thought I'd speak about is women's football. Okay. Now people are going to think, why the hell are you speaking about women's football? Well, this is the thing. Several years ago when the England women won the Euros for the first time, I was on holiday at the time with my wife and kids and my precious mother-in-law. We watched the match in the club on the campsite. We were at Lower Hyde on the Isle of Wight. And after the game, I think it was the following day, my mother-in-law said to me, "That's it, women's football's going to start growing massively and everything." And I said, "It won't. It fundamentally won't." And she said, "Yeah, it will. Because more money will start coming in. Okay. The women start to get more money for themselves to be paid. And it'll start growing." And I said, "It won't." And she said, "Why not?" I said, "Right, this is the fundamentals that you've got to look at. Okay. If a kid is going to go to football on a Saturday, because normally in the grounds, it's normally the lower class or the middle class that are in at the football games going to the football on a Saturday. Okay, so if a kid's going to go, whether it's a boy or a girl, it's irrelevant. Odds are we're going to go and see the men. So, my local football team, okay, to me, professional standard, would be Portsmouth Football Club. So, if my kids ask me, can we go to the football on Saturday? They're not going to ask me to go and see Portsmouth women. Okay. They're going to ask me to go and see the lads playing. Because the reality, most kids nowadays, they don't know the names of the top footballers in the women's game. Okay. They're going to know the names of the men. It's like my daughter's 8 years old. And she'll come home to me every day and say, "Who's better, Rooney or Ronaldo?" I personally would say Ronaldo. But each their own. She says, sorry, it's not Rooney or Ronaldo, it's Messi or Ronaldo. She'll say Messi. My older son will say Ronaldo. He agrees with me. But that's another argument for another day. So, why is it the women's game hasn't progressed? And this is my theory on it, because over the last couple of days, I've seen loads of posts about saying women do the same job. Why don't they get the same amount of money? Well, it's a simple answer at the end of the day, and most people aren't going to like to hear the answer to it. So what you've got to take into account, as of last season, okay, the 5 highest women football players, and I've got how much they actually earn, which is a lot more than I earn, to be honest. Okay, but you've got to take it into account they're at the top of their field in this country. Okay, so at number 5, you've got Alex Greenwood, who was playing for Man City, 200 grand a season. Okay, Pernille Harder, who was at Chelsea, £301,000 a season. Fran Kirby, £310,000. Vivian Miedema, £382,000. And at the front, leading the lot, was Sam Kerr at £417,000, which is a lot of money for the average player. Now, I'm a Nottingham Forest supporter, so I thought, right, let's go in, have a look, how that compares. Because the irony is, for Nottingham Forest, and they're not a big rich team, we ain't got a big rich owner or anything. He pays the players a decent salary. Okay. Now, what I managed to find out was the average first team player for Nottingham Forest, okay, earns £59,600 a week. Okay, and to put that into real terms, Okay, I'm just doing the maths. It's just under 3.1 million a year. And Sam Kerr is the most highly paid, is only earning 417 grand. Okay. And to make it even worse for her, to feel even more poor, but virtually every single player in Nottingham Forest's first team earns more than her. There's only two, okay, that don't. And they're both 19-year-old kids, which is, I don't even know how to pronounce one of them's name properly. Okay, and he's on like £3 grand a week, and he's on 156 grand a year, which is Lamin Silla, okay, from the Gambia, striker, and Luke Campbell, who's on 104 grand a year, 19-year-old goalkeeper. Otherwise, the lowest one is on 780 grand, which is 15 grand a week, and this isn't including any bonuses or anything. Our highest paid player, people aren't going to be surprised, Morgan Gibbs White, 150 grand a week, which is 7.8 million. So the reality is, why are women footballers so badly paid compared to the men? And it's a simple answer. Okay, and this is what it boils down to. If you look at the grounds that the women generally play in, so the average attendance in the Women's Super League is under 10,000. I wouldn't be surprised if you get better than that in League One. Okay, to be honest, I don't actually know without actually doing a check. Okay, where in the Premier League, it's more than 4 times that. It's over 40,000, the average attendance. Admittedly, team I support, Nottingham Forest, we don't have a ground which holds that many. So that's problem number one. Then you've got to look at all the countries around the world which are watching the Premier League, but are buying rights. So that money is going into the Premier League. Okay, so there's your second problem. When it comes to advertisers, and I know the women are complaining that the money should be equally split. But what you've got to remember, a lot of these teams, if you would just say, for instance, take Chelsea's men and Chelsea's women. No, I don't know if it's the case specifically at Chelsea. They're separate companies. They're part of the same company, but they're split into 2 businesses. So if an advert, say for instance Coca-Cola come in and say, right, we want to sponsor the men and women, and we're willing to give you 100 million. They're not going to turn around to you and say, right, we want you to give 50 million to the women, and we want you to give 50 million to the men. They're not going to do that, because it's not seen as value for money. Are they going to potentially see that the same amount of people are going to be watching that game, whether that's on TV, whether that's streaming, whether that's on the day? People buying the shirts, all those types of ways of advertising. Are they going to see the same amount at both for the men and women? No, they're not. So unless the women can start attracting more fans to the ground, they can start getting more viewership in TV at the end of the day, instead of Sky maybe showing it on a Friday night or on a Sunday night, one game, okay, which is arguably maybe at the same time that the men are going to be playing. You've got a fundamental problem. And the women's game is never going to grow. Now, me personally, I'd love to see the women's game grow. My father, he says, I'd rather go and watch the women play than the men, because all you get with the men is a load of play acting and diving. Why are they going to dive? Money at the end of the day. Everything is ruled by money. So unless the women can attract more money, they're not going to get paid the same amount as money as the men. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if the highest grossing football club, as in a women's football club, okay, in the world, doesn't even gross as much as the lowest grossing football club in the Premier League. Now, I checked that a couple of years ago, because last time I checked, it was Barcelona, which was the highest gross, and at the time, it was Bournemouth was the lowest. And Bournemouth well outgrossed Barcelona's women's team at the time, when I did the check. I haven't checked it this year or anything. So, the reality is, women need to attract more money. And it's as simple as that. You can't ask for the same amount of money. It's no different to the World Cup. You know, look at how much money the men's World Cup attracts and brings in compared to how much money the women's brings in. So unless you're bringing in the same amount or more, you've got no room to complain. And it's as simple as that. And I'm really sorry. You know, at the end of the day, football players are self-employed, a lot of them. Okay, so unless you can get up to that level, or bringing in as much, or getting close to it, you're always going to be running onto a loser where you're not going to get paid what they do. So let us know in the comments what you think. If you think I'm wrong, let us know. If you think I'm right, most people will, come up with an argument for the women. Okay, because I'd love to hear a good argument for the women. But for now, thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you all again a bit later.